are they making it up as they go along?
We've been saying for quite some time, you know, that we know where we're going, and before we announced that the show was going to end at the end of Series 6, you know, essentially the audience kept saying to us, do you know what you're doing, or are you making it up as you go along? And the thing that the flash forwards did was, we basically said, yeah, we know where we're going, and here, look at it.
Yeah, just look at it. You know, there's a pretty big difference between saying you know where you're going and saying you knew where you were going. The producers may have indeed known what they wanted to do for Season 5, and they may have even known how they wanted to connect it to Season 6. However, that doesn't mean they knew what they were going to do in Season 5 back in Season 4, let alone in Season 3, Season 2, or Season 1. And in Season 5, it's really obvious that the ending they were initiating was not at all what they had been establishing in those previous seasons. The standard line from Cuse and Lindelof was that in the middle of Season 3, after they reached a 3-year deal with ABC to end the show, they then kickstarted this master plan to wrap up everything. And there isn't a shred of me that believes that. If anything, the earliest they plotted out some semblance of an ending was in Season 5, which helps explain why Season 5 has so many things wrong with it.
Shoot me. Please, please.
Season 5 is a very weird season to talk about, in that it's jointly considered both a good season and a bad season. Among fans who hated the ending, this is widely considered the last competent season of Lost. And yet, when people give indicators of when the show declined in quality, they almost always point to things that happened right around Season 5 or in Season 5. If you try to explain to someone when and how Lost went bad, people will usually gravitate towards saying one of these 3 statements. Oh god, they went back in time. Oh god, they moved the island. And oh god, they went back to the island. Yes, Season 5 is the time travel season. It's the season where John Locke is killed by Ben Linus, but then, miraculously, is reborn on the island, although it's not really him. It's also the season where the show unveils a person who I consider one of the worst characters in the history of modern television. I'll let you guess who I'm talking about. Sadly, it's in this installment of my review that I really will begin to permanently bury Lost, which is unfortunate since Season 5 isn't totally devoid of redeeming value. It's just that the bad parts of Season 5 are really terrible. Think of Season 5 as the people on Charles Widmore's freighter, and think of Season 6 as the island. Season 5, riding off the strengths of the previous seasons, was able to hold its own for a little while, but the closer it got to Season 6, the more it began to completely lose its mind. In fact, what happens at the end of Season 5 is so insane that a person tying chains around themselves and jumping into the ocean is actually a really good metaphor for it. But before I go too deep into my complaints, I just want to say that if anyone is watching this who's never seen Lost before, it's very possible that at some point in this review, you're going to stop and think to yourself, wow, this show sounds fucking awful. How could anyone stick with this for 6 years? And my answer to that is that if you were a hardcore fan of Lost, like I was, you watched it with the irrational assumption that everything, every mystery, every confusing bit of minutia, every inconsistency would get covered. And part of the reason why was that the producers kept reassuring us that they knew exactly where they were going.
We know exactly where we're going.
And so viewers adopted a let's see where they're going with this attitude towards Lost, in which they elected to hold off making any sweeping criticisms until the series was over. And even if you were starting to have doubts about the series, even if Ben Linus moving the island stood out as a giant red flag to you, you had to see it through to the end by this point. You had to know if there really would be a brilliant overarching answer for everything, which everyone desperately wanted to believe was the case. Upon reflection, it's clear as day that the show was going off the rails by this point, and that there were never going to be answers that would be satisfying. But you know what they say, hindsight is 20/20. Anywho, let's begin with some positives about Season 5, because there are a few. Season 5 moves at a rapid pace at first. The flashbacks and flash-forwards are dispensed with the show instead flipping between the people off the island and the people on the island, the latter of whom are skipping through time thanks to Ben Linus moving the island. The removal of the past life and future life cutaways was a welcome change, because for the first time in the series, we finally get episodes that are devoid of backstory. It's all plot. Thank you, Lord! And the show goes about delivering the plot in a fractured, disjointed fashion, like you'd find in a Quentin Tarantino movie, where half the scenes are shown out of order and don't get context to them until a few episodes later. What made Lost cool in the first place was how different it was from everything else on TV, and the out-of-order format over the first 8 episodes of Season 5 is a prime example of that. You never see network shows with a non-linear style like this, and it's actually impressive to see the advanced charting involved to make the scenes line up like they did. Now, I will say that the execution of this format was not at all flawless, because during these episodes, a subplot is introduced where Faraday comes in contact with Desmond during a time skip, and tells him to go find Eloise Hawking so she can help the others.
Right now, me and everyone else you left behind, we're in serious danger. You're the only person who can help us. I need you to go back to Oxford University. Go back to where we met. I need you to go there and find my mother. Her name...
So we watched Desmond go through the process of tracking down Eloise and meeting up with Widmore for one scene and finding out that Faraday experimented on some girl who's also skipping through time, and after watching him trudge through a multi-episode investigation, he finally meets Eloise Hawking, only to learn that she's already helping the other characters.
He said that only you could help him. He didn't say Jack, he didn't say Son, he didn't say Ben, he said you.
But I am helping, dear.
Which rendered the busy work you've been doing completely meaningless. Seriously, the show could have removed every Desmond scene from Season 5 and it wouldn't have affected the plot in the least. Don't get me wrong though, aside from that, I appreciated the nonlinear storytelling, and was rather disappointed when the show reverted to showing flashbacks again in the second half of the season. Another thing I liked about Season 5 was that it toned down the Dharma Initiative. In an earlier part of this review, I did get a comment questioning if pushing the button in the hatch was literally saving the world, and so I figured I should point out that, yep, the producers said on numerous occasions that the Earth would have imploded or something if Desmond hadn't turned that failsafe key. And once you accept that, it's impossible to take the Dharma Initiative seriously, because sane people wouldn't manage a hellscape-inducing doomsday device by sticking people in the ground for 2 decades, and then lie to them the entire time, as if to tempt them to wipe out the human race.
What do these subjects believe they are accomplishing?
Then you factor in that they had stations dedicated to things like time travel and brainwashing, and that in one of them they ran experiments on sharks and polar bears, and that they're needlessly mysterious about everything they do, to the point that the guy in the orientation videos uses a different moniker for each station.
I'm Dr. Marvin Candle. I'm Dr. Mark Wickman. I'm Dr. Edgar Hallerwax.
And the Dharma Initiative comes off like a group run by mad scientists. We get a large dose of the Dharma folk in Season 5, thanks to a final time skip that leaves Sawyer and the others stranded in 1974, and the DI is way more reasonable and acceptable now than they were in the previous seasons. They're just a scientific research group now. They use the stations for practical purposes, and while they are running weird experiments, they don't come off like crazy people like they did in the orientation videos. Of course, with this redefinition, it doesn't make much sense why the Dharma Initiative, right after 1977, suddenly became this megalomaniacal coalition of lunatics who thought pushing a button every 108 minutes was a good idea, but that's par for the course for this season. The best thing about Season 5, though, is the relationship that develops between Sawyer and Juliet. They and the other characters who were stuck in 1974 decide to join the Dharma Initiative, and 3 years later we find out that they're all still living on the island. Is it ridiculous that after 4 seasons of them desperately trying to escape the island, that they all chose to settle down and live with the Dharma Initiative, who they know are gonna get wiped out in a few years? Yes, of course it is. There's some flimsy excuse that they give where they claim that they're still searching sectors of the island in the hope of finding some of the other survivors.
We finished grade 133 today. No sign of our people. No one.
134 then.
How long do we look, James?
As long as it takes.
But that is not a plausible reason for them to all stay on the island, considering Juliet says early in the season that it only takes 15 minutes to walk from the beach to the hatch.
There's a Dharma station 15 minutes from here.
You mean the hatch?
I don't care how imprecise a map of the island might be. The island just isn't that big. I mean, it's big for an island, I guess, but it's an island! And if it only takes a quarter hour to carve into a decent chunk of it, it's preposterous that 3 years later, the Dharma Initiative hadn't scanned the entire landmass 90 times over, especially since they have that amazing research technology. I also didn't buy for a second that Miles would want to live on the island with them. With Jin, I kind of got it because he thinks that Sun might somehow return, but Miles barely knows any of these people. And plus, he's a greedy bastard who only came to the island in the first place to make a payday.
My employer is willing to pay you $1.6 million.
When do we leave?
So you'd think he'd be trying to win the lottery or bet on sporting events or invest in stocks or something. Why does he care if there are any other survivors? With Sawyer and Juliet, though, I totally went with it. One of my biggest pet peeves with Hollywood is that they push movies on us where characters fall in love in, like, no time at all. Like in Transformers, there's this part where Megan Fox's character turns to Shia LaBeouf, and she tells him how happy she is that she got dragged into his stupid life or death struggle.
No matter what happens, I'm really glad I got in that car with you.
The first thing I thought when I saw this was, why does she love him? Actually, that's not true. The first thing I thought when I saw this was, Jesus Christ, are there a lot of lens flares in this scene? But yeah, the second thing I thought was, why has she fallen for this guy? Never mind that she's like the hottest girl on the planet and could pick from anybody. She barely knows this guy. Were the 2 hours they spent together that amazing that she wants to slobber all over this guy at the end of the film? With Sawyer and Juliet, though, 3 years go by off screen, and it was feasible to think that during that time the two of them could grow attached to one another, and that Sawyer could mature into a better person. Sawyer and Juliet represent the last shred of lost humanity. They're just trying to survive and live out their lives one day at a time, which is what Lost used to be about, back when episodes focused on the characters hunting boars and crossing bridges. They're the only characters left who aren't on some mission to save the future or fulfill their destiny. They're basically innocent to all that. And so when Jack and the others show up and jeopardize the life they've been building with their stupid intervention, you can't help but feel for Sawyer and Juliet. They'd settled down and grown past all that crap, and you don't want to see them have to give it all away just because Jack thought they needed rescue. To put it another way, their relationship is the last ember of light that the show hadn't managed to extinguish yet, and the moment the producers stomped it out was the moment Lost became a bleak, irredeemable mess. Let's see, what else did I like about Season 5? I like that Dean Norris randomly popped up in a flashback. You know, good to see Hank and other roles. And that's about it. And now, here's what I don't like about Season 5. Everything else.
Do you have any idea how badly I want to kill you?
So, in order to even tolerate these episodes, you have to make major concessions as a viewer, because things are suddenly put in the show that don't at all mesh with what we'd seen in the previous seasons. Like time travel. Time travel was never supposed to be part of Lost. Damon Lindelof said as much in a 2005 interview of Sci-Fi.com, when he stated, "We're still trying to be firmly ensconced in the world of science fact. I don't think we've shown anything on the show yet that has no rational explanation in the real world that we all function within. We certainly hint at psychic phenomena, happenstance, and things being in a place where they probably shouldn't be, but nothing is flat out impossible. There are no spaceships. There isn't any time travel." By 2008, though, Lindelof was saying that time travel had, quote, been in the DNA of the show since the very beginning, a statement that's pretty easy to refute, given what he and Cuse were actually saying at the very beginning.
So they're not in purgatory, and it's not a dream. And there is, producers say, a logical explanation for everything.
Changing the rules of the show is annoying in and of itself, but what makes matters worse is that Lost becomes really fucking dumb in Season 5. Ben moving the island was like the worst thing ever, because it liberated the showrunners to stick in as many inexplicable plot points as possible, because they probably thought to themselves, well shit, if viewers will accept that a man can move an island, they'll accept whatever crazy nonsense we throw at them. Stupid, schlocky things start happening that you can't even go with anymore. They're not even really mysteries. They're just dumb things that don't make any sense, and the only way to accept them is to turn off your brain and not think about them, which goes against everything the show stood for, even if you disregard the whole science fact aspect. How is Jin able to make it back to the island? Not only did he magically survive the C4 explosion from the freighter, but in order to be affected by the time skip, the blast from the explosion had to propel him in the direction of the island's 305 bearing, and it had to have launched him past the helicopter, which was flying back towards the island and was not within the island's radius, hence why the helicopter didn't go back in time with them. Also, did I mention that Jin survived a bomb going off right in his face? Whatever though, turn off your brain. How does Sun know that Ben was responsible for Jin's not death?
If it wasn't for you, Jin would still be alive.
I'll buy that she could have had an off-screen conversation with Desmond, who could have filled her in on the fact that the C4 on the freighter was linked to Kimi's heart rate. But there's no way she could have known that Ben was the one who killed Kimi. How does she know it couldn't have been Locke, who had just killed an innocent woman before her eyes, or that it wasn't one of the others? In fact, the last any of them saw Kimi was in the woods, when Kate and Richard teamed up to shoot him in the back. As far as they know, Kimi could have died right there, so if anything, she should be blaming Kate for her husband's death.
I'm so sorry. I don't blame you.
And Sun sure as shit shouldn't be working with Widmore to find Ben, since Widmore was the dude who sent the soldiers to the island to kill them, which is the whole reason she's separated from Jin in the first place. But whatever, turn off your brain. Why don't the others travel in time with everyone else? When there's a time skip, Richard and the rest of the others simply vanish, which makes no sense because, remember, it's not like these people were endowed with some special designation from being born on the island or something. The others consist entirely of people who were brought to the island later in life, you know, because of the no birth thing. Plus, why was Juliet able to time skip when she's technically another too? Same thing with Locke. Also, why is the time travel here completely different than it was in the previous seasons? In Season 3, after Desmond turned the failsafe key, he was subjected to a high dose of electromagnetism, which in multiple instances allowed him to relive past moments from his life.
I remember this. I remember this night.
So why weren't Sawyer and company reliving moments from their lives? Because now all that happens is they keep getting thrown to different periods of time on the island. It's hard enough to accept electromagnetism as this catch-all mystical property, and it's even harder when the show isn't remotely consistent with how it's used. Hey, turn off your brain! Who was trying to kill Saeed and Hurley?
I thought it was supposed to be a safe house. I never should have left that island.
One of the driving forces behind the crash survivors returning to the island was that a bunch of dudes with guns show up out of nowhere, stalk them, and in one instance confront them and try to murder them. But it's a mystery who these people are, let alone who they work for or why they're doing this. Shortly after leaving the island, Saeed reunited with Nadia, only to watch her be murdered in front of his eyes, and it was heavily inferred that Charles Widmore was behind her death. But why would Widmore want her dead? How in God's name would killing her help him accomplish anything? And that goes for the other people who made it off the island too. How would their deaths benefit anybody, let alone Widmore?
You still don't trust me?
You sent a team of killers and a boatload of C4 to the island. That doesn't exactly scream trust.
Come to think of it, why did you do that, Widmore? Explain yourself.
I needed Linus removed, so it could be your time. The island needs you, John. It has for a long time. There's a war coming, John. And if you're not back on the island when that happens, the wrong side is going to win.
Oh, so let me get this straight. Your genius tactic to depose Ben Linus, who almost everyone on the island wanted gone anyway, was to arm a bunch of soldiers and tell them to kill everybody without even specifying not to kill John Locke?
Who the hell are you?
And you did that just so you could have Locke be in charge, which he briefly was until he started skipping in time and eventually had to leave the island, which he wouldn't have had to do had you not hired a bunch of soldiers and tell them to kill everybody. Widmore is either lying in this scene or he's a complete idiot, since that war he mentions, the one involving the Man in Black, well, he freaking kickstarted it. He could have put a bullet between Locke's eyes and buried him in the woods, and that would have been the end of it. But by helping Locke get back to the island, he allowed the Man in Black to initiate his evil scheme. Hey, way to go, dude. Way to assure that that war you didn't want to see happen totally happened. Turn off your brain. How does Locke survive this fall? The way he gets off the island and ends the time skips is by descending a well that stood adjacent to the Orchid structure years before it was constructed, because at the bottom of that well was a cave where the time-bending donkey wheel was. Well, at the end of Season 4, when Locke and Ben get in the elevator that took them to the Orchid, it was conveyed that it was taking them an incredibly long time to reach the bottom, and impatient Locke even made a note of how long they'd been waiting there.
How deep is the station?
Deep.
So you'd think that that well had to be like a mile underground or something, or, you know, deep?
Deep.
But in Season 5, when Locke falls after barely making it down the well, all he does is break one of his legs. I realize he's John Locke and all, but he should have fallen hundreds or thousands of feet right then. His spine should have been shooting out of his back, but instead, the well was inexplicably shallow enough that he was still able to stand. Turn off your brain. And while we're on the topic, how did Charlotte know about this well?
Look for the well. You'll find it at the well.
There's a mammoth continuity error with Charlotte, which I'll touch on in a few minutes, but for now, let's just say that she was born in 1971 and was presumably living on the island as a small kid in 1974 when the last time skip occurs. In order to accept that Charlotte knows about this well, we have to buy that as a girl who's about 3 years old, she somehow has a vivid memory of this random well that's deep in the middle of the forest, on a path no civilian would ever get to, one that's in hostile territory, by the way, and that she not only somehow saw this inactive, seemingly innocuous well and remembers it, she's even able to associate it with the Orchid Station, which as of 1974 didn't even exist. Here's my favorite turn-off-your-brainism, though. After he gets off the island, for no explicable reason, Hurley gains the power to talk to dead people. How? There is no how. He just does, and you're just supposed to go with it.
It was really confusing.
Yeah, well, get used to it.
I was able to go with Desmond having crazy abilities because of the hatch and all, like at least there was a reason, but there's no tangible explanation for Hurley to have superpowers. You can't even use the Jacob defense, since Jacob didn't even touch him until his last days off the island. Come to think of it, how come Miles has powers too? I guess Miles could have gotten them from being on the island as an infant, but how come his powers, and Hurley's powers, and Desmond's powers are all totally different? Again, there's no consistency to any of this. Oh, and how come Walt has powers off the island too? I digress. Another thing I don't like about Season 5 is that it's loaded with what I like to call fake mysteries. What's a fake mystery, you ask? A fake mystery is a mystery that isn't implicitly mysterious. However, it's constructed in such a way as to be perceived as a mystery, so that when it's answered, it gives the illusion that the show is actually resolving unanswered questions when it really isn't. In other words, it's a mystery that doesn't need to be a mystery. One of the most common statements from Lost defenders over the years has been that Lost answered most of its questions, or answered all the important ones, and one of the reasons fans think this is because the writers crammed in as many fake mysteries as possible into the final seasons. Lost suddenly couldn't go more than 5 minutes without a character mentioning something that wouldn't get clarified until 4 episodes later, or pointing something out that wouldn't have any meaning until 3 episodes later, or highlighting something for no reason other than because the writers planned for it to play a role later in the episode. A solid example of a fake mystery is the mystery of Jeremy Bentham. At the end of Season 3, we saw Jack standing over someone's casket after he got off the island, a someone who was later identified as Jeremy Bentham, but we never saw who was inside the casket, and in Season 4 it was made even more mysterious as to who this guy was, since the crash survivors who made it off the island refused to call him by his real name.
Jeremy Bentham?
Jeremy Bentham.
Bentham's dead.
What? Why do you call him Bentham? His name...
Don't say it.
In the last shot of Season 4, it was revealed that Jeremy Bentham was actually John Locke, and wouldn't you know it, in Season 5, after that reveal, the characters all reverted to using his real name again.
I'm not taking any risks after Bentham died.
You mean Locke?
Yes, I mean Locke.
So basically, one of the biggest mysteries of Season 4 shouldn't have even been a mystery. Saeed, Kate, and the others already knew that Locke was Bentham, so it didn't make sense for them to be uniformly calling him by his alias, let alone for them to then immediately stop, especially since in private conversation, they weren't at all militant about calling Sawyer by his alias, LaFleur.
How did you get out?
Sawyer let me go.
The writers essentially twisted the characters into calling Locke something they ordinarily wouldn't call him, just so the identity of the man in the casket could be even more mysterious. And then, once the mystery was resolved, the writers were like, well, whatever, there's no point in them calling him Bentham now, and they just had him use his real name again. There are quite a few fake mysteries in Season 5. In fact, as much as I like the fractured storytelling, I can't help but think that a large reason everything was shown out of order was because it essentially turned every scene into a mystery. Even when Walt shows up in his one and only appearance in Season 5, the only thing he says to Locke that isn't meaningless small talk is a line that foreshadows the Man in Black.
You were on the island wearing a suit, and there were people all around you. They wanted to hurt you, John.
Of course, Walt was thinking of a completely different person here, and he probably should have used his cognitive powers to warn Locke that Ben was going to kill him, but that's Walt for you. A truly blatant example of a fake mystery comes in the episode The Lie, where Kate winds up having a sit-down conversation with Sun. Before they meet, however, they briefly have a conversation on the phone, and watch how Lost turns an otherwise mundane phone call into a mystery, complete with dramatic music and everything.
Hello? I can't believe it's you. exactly where that is. I'll be there in half an hour.
Mommy, where are we going?
To see a friend.
6 minutes later in the episode, we find out that she was talking to Sun. Woohoo. Why did this need to be a mystery? I'm opposed to fake mysteries like these because A, they don't benefit the story, and B, the reason they're in the show is a very, very manipulative one. You can actually mine this reason from a quote Damon Lindelof gave in a 2010 interview with Wired, when he was asked if fans might find the answers to some of the mysteries disappointing, given their build-up. This was Lindelof's response. When you spend time with a 3-year-old, you quickly find out that one question just begets another. There's a why in the wake of every why, and the only way to end the conversation is to say, "Oh look, a Chuck E. Cheese!" The show is doing its best to say, "Oh look, Chuck E. Cheese!" To put that in layman's terms, the show is trying to distract people, and that's essentially all the fake mysteries are. Giant distractions. They're there to make you forget about the mysteries that actually matter, the ones that the writers hadn't yet addressed or would never get around to addressing. The writers stacked the deck with this crap, creating newer and newer mysteries that needed answering, so that when fans tallied up all the mysteries at the end of the show and they saw that most of the ones from seasons 5 and 6 had been quote-unquote answered, it allowed the fans to believe that maybe there had been a plan after all. This is also why I hate the Flash Sideways in season 6, because all that is one giant fake mystery. A giant fake Chuck E. Cheese mystery. More on that later. It's also worth noting that some of the fake mysteries don't actually get answered, which is pretty damn ironic when you think about it. The most prominent unanswered fake mystery is probably the Outrigger one. In a time skip that put Sawyer and crew in 2007 or later, the characters were rowing in the water when, suddenly, people in an Outrigger started firing bullets at them. Battle! It's a total mystery who the people in the Outrigger were, and in fact, this is one of the few mysteries in the history of the show that the executive producers conceded was never answered. However, while admitting that, they simultaneously asserted that they knew all along who the shooters were and that this wasn't a dangling thread that they didn't know the answer to. They claimed that they just didn't have the time to fit the answer into an episode because, quote, the logistics of getting all the participants in the Outriggers in the configuration that was on the A side of the time loop was actually really daunting, considering half of them had been killed off. Carlton Cuse also claimed that the Outrigger shootout didn't matter, calling it a fairly obscure piece of the show, and thus was something they weren't bending around in gyrations to solve. My rebuttal to that statement is that if this shootout was as inessential as he says it was, why was it in the show to begin with? Why waste the audience's time with bullshit that isn't worth investing in? Speaking of fecal matter, this brings me to my next giant complaint with Season 5, which is that it has a ton of continuity errors, and as you might expect, almost all of them are related to the time travel.
Time travel's a bitch.
Now here's the thing with that. Time travel is so ubiquitous in movies and TV shows and even video games that I've taught myself not to be too picky about it, honestly. When time travel is in a story, though, the only thing I care about is that that story picks a lane and sticks with it. If you want to make it so that time travel can alter the future, fine. If you want to make it so that time travel does nothing to the future, fine. I'll go with whatever rule you establish, but you have to choose one or the other. You can't have time travel vacillate between having no impact and having a long-lasting impact, and that's more or less what happens with Lost. At first, the show was pretty straightforward in how its time travel worked. Daniel Faraday summarized the futility of trying to alter history by saying that whatever happened, happened.
You cannot change anything. You can't. Even if you tried to, wouldn't work. If we try to do anything different, we will fail every time. Whatever happened, happened.
In other words, in the Lost verse, you can't change the future, because whatever you may do in the past is something that was supposed to happen in the past anyway, and thus you're changing nothing. For instance, when Jack and company take a picture of the Dharma Initiative in 1977, that picture carries over into 2007, and is still there in the Dharma barracks 30 years later, even after they were taken over by the others. Richard Alpert even says he remembers running into them from back then.
I remember these people. I remember meeting them very clearly.
These examples paint a clear picture of what the characters in 2007 are supposed to know, which is a problem, because there are too many instances where the past and present simply don't align. For example, when Ben looks at this photo of Jack and Kate being in the Dharma Initiative, he's absolutely shocked by it, which shouldn't be possible.
Are you trying to tell me that your friends were in the Dharma Initiative?
You don't know about this?
Of course not.
This absolutely should not be his reaction, because remember, Ben has access to Dharma technology so advanced that the others can dig up just about everything a person has ever done.
I know where he was born. I know what his parents did for a living. I know that he was married. And who he was married to. I know why he got a divorce. I know how his father died. I know his height, his weight, his birthday, and his blood type.
In Season 3, they literally put papers down in front of Jack and told him that it contained every moment of his life.
This, Jack, is your life.
If they know all that, by definition, they have to know that he was part of the Dharma Initiative, especially if Richard remembers him, especially if a photo of them from 1977 is still floating around their living area 3 decades later, and yet Ben didn't know that. Another error pops up in the form of pregnancy. Through 4 seasons, the show had been drilling it into our heads that no one had ever given birth on the island. Juliet said on numerous occasions that Claire was the first woman to ever do it and survive.
Every pregnant woman on this island died. That is, every pregnant woman until Claire.
And yet, when Juliet goes back in time, she delivers the birth of not just a baby on the island, but a baby Ethan, who would go on to defect to the others. So not only should the others have known that Juliet had once been a Dharma member because of their amazing research and all, they should totally know that she had previously helped deliver a birth. And if nothing else, they should all know that Ethan was born on the island, especially since Ethan was a surgeon who would later help perform operations on pregnant women who were trying to give birth on the island. It doesn't make sense on any level for none of the parties involved to not know Ethan was born on the island. It contradicts every statement Juliet had ever made about pregnant women. In fact, how does Juliet not know that Rousseau was also able to give birth on the island, since Ben Linus freaking kidnapped Rousseau's child and raised her as his daughter? It strains credulity that in Ben's zeal to solve the island's pregnancy woes, and that in Juliet's meticulous researching of the issue, that she's completely unaware that Ben's kid happens to defy everything she's ever thought about fertility.
Son, pregnant women, they don't survive here. Yes, you did tell me that.
As viewers, we shouldn't have to rationalize why a smart woman with seemingly infinite resources doesn't know something that the people around her are incentivized to tell her about. And in this instance, it's particularly bad because Ethan and Alex were right in front of Juliet the whole time. But even that's not as hard to rationalize as Rousseau's continuity errors, which involve someone not knowing about something that they were personally involved in. In Season 1, Rousseau had a full-length conversation with Saeed about how she came to the island, and in Season 5, when Jin appears before a younger version of her in a time skip, what plays out on screen doesn't at all match up with what Rousseau said took place. Rousseau indicated that her group was on the island for 2 whole months before anything happened to them, but in Season 5, they're accosted by the smoke monster mere hours after they washed ashore. Rousseau said that they met trouble coming back from the Black Rock, but in Season 5, it came when they were near the temple. Rousseau said that the others were the ones who picked off the rest of her science group, but in Season 5, it turns out it was, again, the smoke monster. Rousseau also said that she never actually saw any of the others, but in Season 5, she has a front row view of Ben as he makes off with her kid. There's also the fact that even though Jin played an enormous role in her first few days on the island and guided her in the direction of the radio tower where she would later leave a message, she didn't remember Jin at all when she ran into the crash survivors in Seasons 1, 3, and 4, which is hard to believe considering Jin had barely aged at all from the last time she saw him. An even more glaring inconsistency is that Rousseau captured Ben in Season 2 and didn't remember that he was the man who took her child. She didn't try to interrogate him or electrocute him or do any of the crap that she had done to Saeed, and Saeed hadn't done a fucking thing to her. This guy kidnapped her daughter, and she's like, whatever, Saeed, do whatever you want with him, I don't care.
Tie him up. You should take him to a doctor. He's no good to your dead.
The stock excuse that Die Hard Lost fans offer for these inconsistencies is to state that Rousseau is crazy. She's crazy, and so none of what she says means anything, because she's crazy. Case closed. Except, she really isn't crazy. I mean, she was a tad unhinged at first, because she'd been by herself for 16 years, but she's not psychotic. In fact, Season 5 more or less vindicates her sanity by showing that even though she killed a member of a research group, it was in self-defense. Plus, the fact that she was able to survive for 16 years by herself in a hideout that is still somehow able to generate electricity speaks to her ingenuity, something that's also shown in all the various booby traps that she set up throughout the island and that she was able to chart out an intricate topographical map of the entire landscape, something the Dharma Initiative should have been able to do. So to disregard all that and just say, she's fucking insane, it's a miracle she can even tie her shoes, doesn't give her character justice. I mean, come on, it's not like she ever brutally swung an axe into the midsection of an innocent person or anything. Unlike another woman on the show, ... I'll say this about Russo. I can almost live with her not recognizing Jin, because maybe she just kept looking past him or something. However, she didn't recognize Ben. She's retained the ability to handle delicate explosives. But she's forgotten that a person who looks like this once took her kid? This isn't a face you forget, folks, especially when they kidnap your baby and when you're on a nearly deserted island. I'll tell you something else you shouldn't forget, that there is a ridiculous continuity error in episode 13 of season 5, which, to the naked eye, appears to solve the mystery as to why the numbers are on the side of the hatch.
Hey, Glenn! What's the serial number that goes on the hatch lid?
48 15.
So yeah, I think a few of you who saw part 2 of my review were confused why I had this listed as an unsolved mystery, but pay attention to where these numbers are being put.
23.
You see, in Season 5, they put the numbers on the lid of the hatch. In Season 1, they're not on the lid. They're on the side exterior of the hatch, which is made extremely clear in the 20-second zoom-in of it that I showed earlier. And even this pounded-in style of the numbers is completely different from the way they looked on the hatch in Season 1, when they appeared to have been carved by hand. Now, there's one and only one way for this scene to make sense, and that's if the numbers were indeed on the lid of the hatch in Season 1, as well as being on the side of it, but that for whatever reason, the characters just never mentioned it or noticed it for whatever reason. So, I went back and rewatched some key scenes from Season 1 just to be absolutely sure if this was a continuity error or not. I did this thinking it was a long shot, because there were plenty of scenes where Locke and Boone were staring right at the hatch lid, and you'd think they would have touched on any numbers that would have been on it. Hell, there was even a scene where Hurley was looking directly over top it, but I wanted to be absolutely sure. So, I found a few scenes where the numbers were supposed to be on it, and sure enough, the numbers weren't there! This is amazing. The writers went back in time to show us the origins of numbers that were never there. The crazy thing, too, is that in a DVD special, they show a prop version of the hatch that was used in this episode, and it had the numbers right there on the side of the lid, and it's this version of the hatch lid that would later be auctioned off as the official thing in 2010. Curiously, the numbers on it don't match how they looked in the episode, but that's not what's important. What's important is that in order for the prop department to mimic how the numbers looked on the hatch from back in Season 1, they either had to alter the previous hatch lid by adding the numbers onto it, or they had to make a new lid from scratch and somehow not realize during the 20-second zoom-in they were studying that the numbers weren't on the hatch lid. Either way, it's an almost inexplicable error, and ultimately no, we don't know why the numbers are on the side of the hatch, or who put them there. But let's pretend, hypothetically, that this wasn't an error, that the numbers were on the lid in Season 1, and that this scene makes perfect chronological sense. Let's imagine for a second that that was the case.
What's the serial number that goes on the hatch lid? Serial number, the serial number, the serial number.
These numbers are a serial number? That's it? You had a giant, long zoom in on the numbers, and you had Hurley lose his shit when he saw that they were on the hatch.
The numbers are bad! The numbers are bad! Hurley! The numbers are bad! Stop!
And it was just a serial number? Like the kind you'd find on the back of a game console? How boring and disappointing an answer would that be? But the continuity gaffe that rules them all, the one that takes the proverbial cake, is the one involving Charlotte. In Season 5, we're led to believe that Charlotte was born in 1971, and in 1977 we see her living on the island as a small girl. But in Season 4, Ben attached a very different age to her.
Charlotte Staples Lewis. Born July 2nd, 1979, Essex, England.
And that's pretty relevant, because if she was born in 1979, then all those scenes from her in the mid-70s shouldn't have happened. Die-hard Lost fans are pretty creative when it comes to explaining away stuff like this, but this is an inconsistency that even they can't brush aside, because when Ben was pronouncing when her birthday was, the context of that scene was that Charlotte was gawking in awe that he knew so much about her.
Parents David and Jeanette, eldest of 3, all girls. She was raised in Bromsgrove, did her undergraduate studies at Kent, took her PhD in cultural anthropology at Oxford.
That means that the only way for that scene to not be an error would be if Charlotte, a world-class anthropologist, suddenly forgot when she was born. So, yeah. Now, once again, let's just say that this too was a production faux pas. It was an accident, they just got the year wrong. If that was the case, I honestly wouldn't make that big a deal about it. It's not nothing, because it is front and center, but again, I want to be entirely fair to this show. Sometimes a minor error can slip through the cracks, and with a behemoth like Lost, it might have been inevitable that a mix-up would rear its head at some point. I'm willing to bet that most serialized shows have had at least one notable anachronism in it. Even Breaking Bad had a scene in it that referenced the 2011 assassination of Osama bin Laden, even though that scene should have taken place closer to 2010.
You know, I gotta be straight with you, man. Taking out all these guys is doable. But hitting them in 3 separate jails all within 2 minutes? I mean, whacking bin Laden wasn't this complicated.
Shit just happens sometimes. People make mistakes. And if this mix-up with Charlotte was just an honest mistake, if it really was just a production error, I'd honestly be willing to let it go, outside of maybe mentioning it once, like I already have. Having said that, here's where this particular inconsistency takes a left turn, and here's what separates the people who made Breaking Bad from the people who made Lost. When Vince Gilligan, the executive producer of Breaking Bad, touched on the Bin Laden reference, he admitted that it was an inconsistency. He said a writer asked him if he planned to reconcile it, and he said, well, honestly, I don't. When Lost's executive producers were compelled to address Charlotte's age inconsistency, not only were they not as forthcoming, they did the one thing you should never, ever do. They blamed it on Charlotte's actress and threw her under the bus in a podcast.
Hi, Damon and Carlton.
Okay.
I'm loving season 5. My question is about Charlotte. Now, this is a question that we've been asked a couple times now, so let's get serious and use the podcast to straighten up the record. So what's the deal? Hallucination, weird time travel, or did you just screw up, Carlton?
No, we didn't really just screw up, but what happened basically was the actress Rebecca Mader, who we cast in this part, was younger than the character we originally conceived, and she did not really want to brand herself as being 37, which I think is what she would have had to been if we had stuck to that initial birthday.
Yeah, I think in the script it said 1970.
Or 71 or something.
70 or 71.
And so, basically, she took it upon herself to readjust the birth date on the set.
Yes, Rebecca Mader, that was her, one of the first scenes she shot, I think.
Yeah.
And she basically said, I wasn't born in 1970, I was born in 1979.
So I'm going to make it 1979.
Not thinking like we pay any attention to dates on this show, because we're certainly not going to call down to Hawaii and say, oh, but they're going to be time traveling next year, and after your character dies, this is going to be a very important fact.
Right.
So it got changed, and in the editing room, we probably should have said, we should have caught it, but we didn't.
Yeah.
Funny story about all that, none of that was true. Like, at all. Shortly after that podcast was posted, an agitated Rebecca Mader went to her Facebook page and wrote, I'm pissed Damon and Carlton lied about me on the most recent podcast. The timeline error was their mistake, and they are making it out to be my fault. Not cool. I just wanted to say that I never changed my character's age on the set of Lost, as Damon and Carlton accused me of on the most recent podcast. Not long after Mader's response, Cuse and Lindelof sent a joint email to Entertainment Weekly, and they pretty much folded like cardboard. Rebecca is absolutely right, and we apologize to both her and the entire fan community for screwing up the story. Our first mistake was the timeline gaffe, but the much more significant one was wrapping Rebecca up in this when she had nothing to do with it. Not her fault on any level. It was our bad, 100%. Huh. You know, that thing they said about her demanding to have her age changed, their depiction of her was rather specific. Both of them even gave her dialogue.
And she basically said, I wasn't born in 1970, I was born in 1979.
So I'm going to make it 1979.
So for all of that to be untrue, it's almost as if they made it up. But whatever, because hey, yeah, you know, let's give them credit. At least they did the right thing and got around to issuing a sincere and honest apology. Or they almost did. Mixed within that apology email was an explanation as to why their previous explanation about Charlotte's age was so wrong, and their new explanation was so mired in bullshit that I feel it necessary to read it in its entirety. There were a gazillion questions. Okay, I'll skip the first line, it's just set up. When we inquired as to how this happened, the intel came back that we used Rebecca Mader's birthday, July 2nd, 1979, because she was actually 8 years younger than the character as originally conceived/scripted. We misremembered this as having come from Rebecca herself on the set, but in fact, it came several days earlier when our continuity expert, Greg Nations, pointed it out and suggested using Rebecca's actual birthday for Charlotte. And so, the mistake was ours. Rebecca's production draft did have the date as being 1979. Okay, 3 things. Number 1, you misremembered? Number 2, Rebecca Mader wasn't born on July 2nd, 1979. She was born on April 24th, 1977. Now, it is true that for many years, websites have incorrectly listed her as being born in 1979. In fact, I actually had a hard time confirming when her real birthday was, because some websites still list her as being born in 1979. At the same time, did the producers not realize how old she was when they hired her? It's pretty ridiculous that they wouldn't at least double-check this, given how relevant her age was to this story, and that one of them actually shares a birthday with her. Oops! And number 3, way to throw Greg Nations under the bus this time, guys. I'm not sure how that qualifies as taking 100% responsibility for this, but c'est la vie. The larger issue is that if Greg Nations really did suggest aligning Charlotte and Rebecca's ages, which I do think is credible, then there's something wrong with the rest of the producer's story, because if there really was a plan in place, as they claim, in which Charlotte was born in 1971, then it doesn't make sense for the show's continuity expert to suggest making her 8 years older than she should have been. Wouldn't Greg Nations, of all people, know how damaging this would be to the timeline? Beyond that, why did the producers then accept his suggestion? This error didn't fall through any cracks. This was something they personally agreed to. Are we to believe that between the 2 executive producers and Greg Nations, that all 3 of them simultaneously suffered amnesia about their plan, and that's why they all agreed to this, and that none of them caught this error when it was being put into the script, or when it was filmed, or when it was being edited, and that on top of all that, they did this without even knowing when Rebecca Mader's real birthday was, and that they genuinely forgot about all this to such an extreme that the 2 producers accidentally provided corroborating accounts on a podcast about how this was all her fault, and we're supposed to believe that this was all just one giant misunderstanding? Really?
That has got to be the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Let me reiterate that this was their retraction. Their retraction of their lie contained nothing but lies.
Don't lie.
You're lying.
You're lying.
You're lying.
You're lying.
You're lying.
You're lying. You're lying.
You're lying. You're lying.
You're lying.
I think you're lying.
You're lying to me.
Why are you lying?
Why are you lying?
Why are you lying to me?
Why are you lying to me?
Why are you lying to me? I don't understand why you're all lying.
Why did you lie?
You lied to me.
You lied to me.
You looked me right in the eye and you lied to me.
Quit lying, dude.
I want the truth.
Tell your mother the truth.
Then they're not interested in exposing the lie.
These people are lying to us.
I know they're lying.
Stop lying! Why did you lie to me? You stole my life! What else did you lie to me about? What else? Tell me!
There is, of course, an alternate explanation why Charlotte's age is different in Season 4, Episode 2, and it goes like this. There wasn't a plan. At the time that episode was made, the writers hadn't yet come up with the idea of using her in time travel, so at the time, it didn't matter when she was born, and 1979 was as good a year as any. That's why Greg Nations would have thought they might as well align Charlotte and Rebecca's ages, and that's why Cuse and Lindelof were perfectly okay with that. And that, folks, is 1 billion times more likely to be the real explanation than whatever the fuck Cuse and Lindelof wanted you to think it was. But Assuming that is the real explanation, and let's face it, it almost certainly is, the producers could never admit that. They could never come out and state that they had made up a portion of their mythology on the fly, because it would have tampered with the facade that they had been establishing, which was that everything they were doing was all part of a master plan. They needed to keep that illusion going, and so, it appears, they were willing to lie and paint one of their own actresses as a narcissistic diva, just so they could avoid giving the same one-sentence mea culpa that Vince Gilligan gave over the Bin Laden line. The depressing truth of the matter is that they absolutely were making this shit up on the fly, and it isn't even debatable. Every inconsistency, every contradiction, and every unanswered mystery can be easily explained by rationalizing that the producers never had a plan and were constantly adjusting even the most basic elements of the show. You want to know why Russo didn't recognize Ben? The real answer is that Michael Emerson, who played Ben, was only supposed to appear in a limited run of episodes in Season 2 as a guest star, but the showrunners liked him so much that they made him a full-time cast member. In other words, there is virtually no chance that the writers had made up that these characters had met before when this scene was written. You want to know why the others changed so dramatically over the seasons? It's probably because the writers didn't have a concrete plan for them and were constantly making things up about them. You want to know why Hurley didn't have powers in the first 3 seasons? It's probably because the writers didn't make that up about him until at least Season 4. You want to know why Richard didn't recognize Kate and Saeed when he ran into them in Season 4? It's probably because the writers didn't make up that he had met them before until Season 5. You want to know why Juliet didn't know that Ethan was born on the island? You want to know why Ethan didn't remember Locke in Season 1, even though we learn in Season 5 that he had shot at him in a time skip? You want to know why Ethan was portrayed by a 39-year-old actor in Season 1, and why he was described in the script as being a man in his 30s, even though he's supposed to be 27 in Season 1? The easy answer is that the writers didn't make any of that stuff up about him until Season 5. You want to know why we don't know why Widmore wants the island torched in Season 4? I highly doubt it's because the show was holding off on the answer. It's more likely that the writers simply hadn't come up with one yet. You want to know why we never got a resolution to the Outrigger shootout? I'll bet anything it never made the air because the writers hadn't planned it out all the way and couldn't show the resolution even if they wanted to. And you want to know why mere weeks before they reached a 3-year deal that would give Lost 121 episodes, Damon Lindelof was adamantly telling reporters that Lost would never go beyond 100 episodes or never get to a 6th season, saying, "We don't want to produce those episodes of Lost, and in fact, we are not going to produce those episodes of Lost," because he was making that part up too. Now, I know for a fact that there are some hardcore Lost fans out there who will be tempted to fight me on this, who want to believe that the producers weren't making any of this stuff up and that there was a plan. But, come on, let's be real, people. This show mutated way too much for there to have been a long-term plan. If you still need convincing, allow me to share with you a Lost Writer's Guide that J.J. Abrams and Damon Lindelof produced for the show way back on May 5th, 2004, 4.5 months before the pilot aired. This document, one of the earliest in the show's history, is fascinating for a number of reasons, not the least of which is its mission statement. Our mandate is to give Lost the same treatment as a Michael Crichton novel, the document reads. Every time we introduce an element of the fantastic, we approach it from a real place. If we do it right, the paranormal will always be coupled with a logical explanation to remind the audience that this is the real world. And at the bottom of the document was a list of 30 potential subjects to base an episode of Lost around. Subjects that ranged from euthanizing a burn victim, to going on a hunt for water, to quarantining a medical outbreak, to finding Vincent in the woods with one of his ears bitten off by a human, to helping Hurley climb out of a hole he fell in, to dealing with a hurricane, to dealing with the others, and yes, to discovering a hatch in the middle of the woods. Some of these story ideas found their way into the show. Others, like the one about ravenous soldier ants stealing the people's food, wisely never saw the light of day. Still, there is a common thread between all 30 of these, and that is that they're all very, very restrained, comparatively speaking. There's no mention here of a frozen donkey wheel, or Jacob, or the Man in Black, or Mother, or time travel, or wormholes, or any of that crap. Within this 27-page manifest, the word magic appears exactly 0 times, and while there is mention of the monster, it's indicated that whatever it is, it too has a determinable, logical explanation, and was probably man-made. So let's ask ourselves, was going from this to this something that they planned 6 years out? Of course it wasn't. Of course they were making it up as they were going along. And every time the executive producers went out and claimed that the show was following an intricate long-term plan, they simply weren't being honest.
By the end of the show, will we know all of the unanswered questions? For example, how did Ben get Block's dad to the island? What is the smoke monster? Who is Jacob? Those kind of questions. Are we going to get answers for everything, or are there going to be certain things that are not solved?
You know, certainly all the questions that that Russ has, the three that you just threw at us, will be answered by the end of the series. You know, our hope. Oh, go ahead. Our hope is that by time the show ends, it will be very obvious as to whether or not we were making it up as we went along, or that we had a plan. You know, the show will speak for itself.
There are two notable instances from Season 5, besides the ones I've already mentioned, where the writers clearly called an audible on an established aspect of the show. The first came during a time skip in 1954, when Locke, Sawyer, and Juliet interrogated a pair of men with guns. In this scene, the two men covertly spoke to each other in Latin, but conveniently, Juliet understood them perfectly.
And how is it that they know how to speak Latin, Juliet?
The same reason I do. Because they're others.
That's right, it's suddenly dropped on us that the others can all speak fluid Latin, and that it's apparently an ingrained part of their culture since they've been teaching each other this language for at least 50 years. This revelation doesn't play a role in any episode before this. There was no scene in Season 3 where the others were talking to each other in Latin or jotting something down in Latin. The writers pulled this out of their ass, I assume because they wanted to have Juliet recognize the language these guys were speaking without it just being a coincidence and with it being a precondition that only another other would know it. So bam, the others now have their own official language.
Who taught you Latin?
Others 101. Gotta learn Latin. Language of the enlightened.
Enlighten my ass.
You can tell the writers completely made this up too, because remember, there was a scene in Season 3 where a different pair of others talked to each other in a secondary language, and in that scene, they weren't speaking in Latin, they were speaking in Russian.
Мы не можем рисковать. Ты знаешь условия. Есть другой выход. А раздали нас. Мы не дадим импотинатор.
This would have been a really good time for the writers to have the others deploy that super secret dead language of theirs, the one no one else would know. Oh well, good thing this lady could speak perfect Russian. Oddly enough, the other notable about-face from Season 5 also took place in 1954, when it suddenly didn't pay to be a background character. So, as I'm sure many of you know, there were initially 48 survivors from the Oceanic 815 plane crash, and of those 48, only a dozen or so had speaking roles. So that left like 35 background extras, or socks, as the producers called them, who were always off in the distance, doing something unimportant. Like they'd be walking, or talking, or quietly listening to the main characters. They were basically just decoration. What's interesting, though, is that the extras were initially slated to play a very active role in the series. A month before the show premiered, Damon Lindelof gave an interview with Ain't It Cool News, where he insisted that they wouldn't merely be used as cannon fodder. Quote, "We've always loved the idea that one of our series rigs goes trapezing off into the jungle with one of the castaways we've never seen before. The audience is thinking the poor Yahoo with one line is going to die a gruesome and horrible death, but then it's the regular who gets wiped out. It will be done! Watch and see!" Well, people did watch and see, and, I know this is shocking, that never happened. The extras were almost never involved in the plot, and on the rare instance that one of them found their voice and started talking, you could pretty much write their name in the death note, because you knew they weren't going to be on the show much longer. This was actually the main reason why Nikki and Paula were created in the first place, because the producers realized they hadn't really done anything with the extras. But Nikki and Paula were instantly rejected by the fans, and were promptly dispensed with, and by Season 5, the writers had so little attachment to the rest of these unnamed castaways that they decided, meh, let's just have them all be slaughtered. During the time skip in 1954, the remaining survivors were all hanging out by the beach when, out of nowhere, a bunch of others started shooting flaming arrows at them. This forced all the castaways to scatter into the woods, and while every reoccurring series regular, including even Vincent, managed to make it out alive, every single background character either died here or was never seen or heard from again. Coincidence? No. Not that his validation is necessary here, but Damon Lindelof did confirm that these deaths were purposeful in 2009, when he said, "The show is now moving into a phase where the presence of the socks was no longer directly necessary, so we killed them with arrows, and that's just what you do." What he failed to expound upon was why the socks were less necessary in Season 5 than they were in Season 4, or Season 3, or Season 2, or Season 1. And this is where they were making it up as they were going along totally comes into play. What I'm absolutely convinced happened was, when the writers mapped out what they were going to do in Season 5, and they decided that they'd have the main characters live with the Dharma Initiative in the mid-70s, they immediately realized what a tremendous pain in the ass it would have been for the socks to be there too. Because think about it, instead of 5 people lying to the Dharma Initiative about their identity, now there'd be like 23 people lying about their identity. All of them trying to maintain the same cover story. All of them still living on the island. Plus, it would force the show to have to account for them, so there'd have to be periodic scenes where Sawyer or Miles or someone would check up on them and make sure that every single one of them was still on board with the plan. And then on top of all that, the writers would have had to flesh out the extras and give them defining features so that we'd be able to distinguish those extras from the regular Dharma Initiative extras. Basically, too much attention would have to be diverted onto characters who we, the audience, didn't give a shit about anyway, so the writers made the most practical decision they could at the time, which was to kill off all the socks. And that's fine, but this scene did not come about organically. The writers couldn't possibly have planned to drag these background characters around for 4 seasons just so they could all suddenly die a random, insignificant death in the middle of the past. No, this scene happened because the writers realized at the last second that they had to kill them off in order to continue the story. And so they did. The flaming arrows were essentially a filter, designed to keep the important characters in and the irrelevant ones out, and that's why almost 20 people die in this one scene. By the way, my favorite part about this scene is that Sawyer instantly gives up on these people.
Come on, he's dead. Come on, you want to be dead too? Come on. No.
James,
No.
stop.
No.
James, stop.
Come on and help me.
James.
Come on, he's dead. There's nothing you could have done. We gotta go now.
Yeah, Juliet, there's nothing you could have done. Everyone knows that an arrow to the chest is instant death in this show. Well, almost.
What do you mean, Helen? Well, just ask one a question and they'll answer with another question. That's just to see if you're paying attention.